Are there any role-playing games out there that you absolutely adore, but also fully acknowledge are not very good? For me, that is Marvel Universe Roleplaying Game. And on this episode of Learning From, we're going to be examining this deeply flawed, but also wildly innovative game from over 20 years ago. Hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and every Friday morning on this YouTube channel, we dive into a new subject on tabletop role-playing game design. I don't have all the answers, but together, through these sorts of conversations and discussions, we hope to unravel these challenges that we all face and become better designers. And this specific series of videos isn't about reviewing role-playing games. It's not really about questioning whether a game is good or bad, but it's about what lessons we can learn from that game to then apply to our own designs. So let's talk about pushing boundaries, randomization, and superheroes. Chances are you've never heard of Marvel Universe Roleplaying Game. It was released over 20 years ago in 2003 by Marvel itself. This is when Marvel was dabbling in publishing on its own after breaking with TSR just a year or so before. And it was met with some critical acclaim, but really not financial success. Because Marvel was trying to compete with D&D at the time, and so their measure for success was going to be enough market share to really take a piece out of that pie. And when the game didn't really meet those expectations, they pulled out support. Which is unfortunate because there was some initial momentum. One reviewer even cites that it looks like Marvel is ready to get behind this puppy for years to come, and saying that it's a good investment if you buy into this product because they were already having multiple additional expansions planned. But in the end, after I think 1 or 2 expansions, they just stopped producing it. And now you can find copies of this book for very cheap because they printed a million other things. I found my copy for just a little over 10 USD, for example. Now, what made this game so interesting, especially for the time, but also doomed it, was its commitment to resources over randomization. So let's unpack what the game is like, and then we can start to decipher what lessons we can learn from it. The core resolution of the game involves investing stones of energy into various actions, and you compare that against a number set by the GM. If you've invested enough stones, you succeed. If you don't, you fail. And there's this giant resolution chart you can refer to that helps you adjudicate success and failure when interacting with the world. For example, if I wanted to pick up a school bus, I would need to invest 7 stones of energy into some sort of strength or super strength or telekinesis ability. If I wanted to fly at the speed of light, I would need to put 10 into that. And these act as a non-linear curve of power, starting with the mundane in the first few tiers, all the way up to godlike power around tier 10. And here is where we see the first clue as to a lesson we could learn, because this game is attempting to accommodate such a wide swath of power. It's attempting to allow you to have Marvel characters like Daredevil or Bullseye in a story with Thor. These characters are on entirely different power levels, and the system is attempting to accommodate all of it. That is ambitious, but also difficult. And so the way this plays at the table using your character sheet is you place your stones in your reserves and then move them into various actions. For example, I have the Human Torch here, and if I want to start using his various abilities, I take energy, or red stones, out of my reserve and place them into all these actions, like my fire control and flight and so forth. Those then get spent in a scene to cause various effects, to damage enemies, or absorb energy from a burning building, or fly across the city. Because you see, this game is going for a kind of rules-light, very narrative-first approach where you don't need to track individual squares or anything of that minutia. The players could be flying through the city at Mach 5, going between town after town, or flying into space, and all within one scene, because these are superheroes. And so it expects you and the GM to work together to sculpt the scene. And that would be all well and good if there weren't some issues with how your characters are built. Because your durability attribute sets the amount of white stones you have, your health points. And those white stones, in turn, set how much maximum energy you can have and how much you regenerate per turn. If I have 3 white stones, I recover 3 energy per turn. But if I take 1 stone of damage, I now only recover 2 energy per turn. And this creates a death spiral very quickly, where you have less energy to defend yourself as you take damage, which means you take more damage and have less energy to defend yourself, and very quickly you can run out of gas. In fact, in one of the examples in the rulebook, Gambit is caught off guard by Sabretooth and literally gets one-shot by him. He just gets like absolutely clobbered, and he's out of the fight, I think for like 10 turns, it says, or something absurd. And that doesn't feel great. And now the real rub here is that you choose your own durability during character creation if you're making your own superhero. So it very much incentivizes maximizing that option. You also can build around having more regeneration, like characters like Wolverine. You can choose options that let you recover more white stones and more red stones during any given scene. And this means that characters like Wolverine, or characters with a lot of energy, get to do more during a fight. They get to play the game more because the resources they use to fuel their abilities and actions is replenished more quickly than other characters. If you imagine in Pathfinder 2e, if you could specialize in an attribute that gave you more action points per turn rather than just the 3, that if you could have 5 or 6 action points compared to other players, it wouldn't feel very good at the table if the player sitting next to you gets to do twice as many things as you do in a given turn. And now the rulebook does call out that, hey, on the X-Men you have characters like Jubilee that, despite not being as powerful as Storm or somebody else, still contribute to the success of the team. They're still a valid member, and that's true narratively speaking, but at the table when playing a game, Jubilee simply gets to do less. They get to play the game less than a more powerful character like Wolverine would. Wolverine's more optimized and gets to actually have more fun than Jubilee. And I think that's revealed the first major issue with Marvel Universe, and what we should really learn here. It's that if you're going to make a game that uses action points, an amount of things you can do on the turn, to not let players have differing amounts of them. Don't let players specialize in having more action economy than other players. That creates a very feel-bad moment at the table when somebody's just getting to play the game more. They're getting to do more than somebody else. It's okay if there's imbalance in a game, but don't unbalance the fun. And now I've been talking a lot with Zarek, the lead designer of Indominant, a superhero role-playing game, and we talk a lot about balance, and we have some differing opinions on that. However, I wanted to talk to him about his thoughts on Marvel Universe Role-Playing Game, and so we had some brief discussions. Now, his game is currently finishing its Backerkit run if you're watching this when this video airs, so I'm going to put a link down below. I've played Indominant, both as a GM and a player, and I've found it a lot of fun. And I think that Indominant has the right idea when it comes to its action economy. But let's Zarek talk about his thoughts on Marvel Universe briefly here.
Hey Peter, thanks for having me give my thoughts about this very unique and interesting RPG. It was very fun to read this game and the rules and just see how much of a unique take on RPGs they had. I think the problem with a game like this comes in the fact that they have a bunch of pre-made characters, which is really cool. It makes jumping into the game very easy. But at the same time, when we're talking about superheroes, especially superheroes in the Marvel Universe or DC Universe, there's characters like Punisher, who he's kind of just a regular guy. Of course, he's not just an average Joe. But when you stand Punisher next to Hulk, they're not on the same power level. And players might want to play, those could be two characters that you want to play together. And even just from the numbers, Punisher, there's no way that Punisher can have much impact compared to Hulk. He just does not have the resources available to do that. And they talk about this during the kind of introduction of the game rules, and they say that there's value to a player or a character like Jubilee. They use Jubilee as an example. I think they're pulling from the scenario from the animated X-Men series where Jubilee first meets the X-Men, and she doesn't really have she's not very powerful. It can make for a very good storytelling, but I think when we're talking about a game a character like Jubilee, and at least the way these mechanics are implemented, just can't do very much compared to like a Wolverine. Wolverine's going to have so many more red stones than her every panel or every page. He's going to keep healing up his white and red stones, and Jubilee's going to gain a couple red stones every round. And so what if the difficulty of everything is like 6, and Jubilee, maybe she only starts with 8 or 9 red stones. She has to spend all of her red stones right at the start. The only kind of weight or impact that a character like that can have in a system, as far as I'm reading it, is to overcome resistance. So you would use Wolverine to overcome the difficulty, and as long as one person overcomes the difficulty, all of your totals can sort of beat down the resistance. And so Wolverine's your heavy hitter who he gets like 6 to overcome the difficulty, and Jubilee adds 3 so that they take away 9 resistance. But she's only doing half of what Wolverine's doing, and she's spending probably most of her resources to do that. And so I think that's where the problem with a game like this comes in. It's kind of sad because obviously I love Marvel Heroes, but I think the IP and just the fact that the game is set in this world where there's characters that are down at the bottom of the power, and they could be fighting next to characters that are like among the most powerful in the universe, or even just the planet. And so the system and the mechanics really make that apparent to me upon first reading. And maybe everything I'm saying is wrong. So I haven't played the game, but that's what I see when I read the game. Is I think that's probably a place where there's a lot of issues that come up. But anyways, thank you again, Peter, and definitely excited to see the video and see what you say. Bye.
I know I wasn't surprised that Zarek echoed some of my thoughts on this, because he and I have a lot of shared design philosophy, even if the games we're working on are very different. You see, in Indominant, there are an amount of action points you get per turn. It's 5, and characters use Drive, a meta resource that allows them to fuel their special abilities. But the way that this game has handled it has kept it balanced, even if it's not entirely symmetrical. You see, because in Indominant, the archetype you've chosen, like being a bruiser or a guardian or an arbiter, determines how you regain your drive during a fight, and drive being how you use your superheroic abilities. So some characters get discounts on the cost of their powers each turn, some of them recover more drive by getting hurt by enemies or hurting others, other ones start off slow and then spike up in power midway into the fight, and all of these average out to be roughly the same drive recovery turn over turn if you zoom out a bit, but it gives each of them a little bit more of its own identity and incentivizes certain gameplay. But at the end of the day, a different character isn't going to have wildly different drive recovery than you, no matter how you've specialized. And I think that's the healthier approach. I know this has not been a paid spot for Indominant. I've not been compensated to say any of this. I've just spoken on a number of occasions to Zarek and his team, and I've gotten a chance to play their game, and I believe that a high tide raises all ships, and I like shouting out other indie designers where I can. So I'll put links down below to their campaign, and just so you know, there is a free, almost 200-page primer you can download that gives you a great impression on what the product will be. I respect a lot of designers that put their game out there for free to assess before anybody buys in. So links down below, go check it out if that's up your alley. Now, I know I've been saying that the core resolution here doesn't actually work in practice, but I still think there's a lot of respectable work that went into this book. I love when a game attempts to push the boundaries of role-playing games, to experiment with new ideas, and to not just take the same thing we've been playing over and over again. So the second and maybe most important lesson I want to take away from this game is about innovation versus iteration, and some self-defeatist attitudes I've seen among my fellow indie designers. So let's get some quick definitions out of the way. Innovative design is where you push the limits of what people are already accustomed to, where you create something wholly new and shake things up. Examples would be like Marvel Universe Roleplaying Game. Its stone-based system, its resource management over randomization, is innovative. It's something different, a different way of approaching tabletop role-playing game design. And it's great to aspire to do that. We all want to be the next John Harper, making our own blades in the dark that then people for years thereafter adapt into their own worlds. Or imagine building Powered by the Apocalypse all those years ago. These were innovative designs for their time, and we put them up on a great pedestal, all wanting to be that guy. Iterative design, on the other hand, is where you take established structures, things people are familiar with, and simply incrementally change it, tweak it in small ways, making just tiny, smart decisions to shift that structure in a not necessarily novel direction, but, nudging it along for your purposes. Now, I've talked to a lot of indie designers who are worried that what they're building is not innovative enough, that what they're building isn't cool and different, and will people care if the game isn't changing things up for everybody? And I don't like that sort of defeatist talk, because I think there's value and drawbacks to both innovative and iterative design. Marvel Universe Roleplaying Game is a great example of that failure of innovative design. They went with something that people weren't familiar with, that's totally new, and that's hard to do. It's hard to make that right when there isn't a precedence you've set before. What you end up with is something interesting on the intellectual level, and not great at the table. So overvaluing innovation comes at a big cost. People just won't necessarily know what to make of your rule system, and you're all on your own as you build it. And really, innovative design is rare. We don't get a lot of John Harpers who jump the community forward in some dramatic way. That's not where most of the hobby moves. That's not how most games are made. And that's where iterative design comes in. I think that most of the role-playing games out there do iterative approach, rather than necessarily going for something wholly innovative. And there are so many wonderful games that simply iterated on a common core structure. I mean, take a look at how Wizards of the Coast attempted to innovate on Dungeons & Dragons with its 4th edition D&D, which really turned a lot of people off to that edition. So much so that Paizo iterated on 3.5 edition when it came out with Pathfinder 1E. And then they iterated on Pathfinder themselves to create Pathfinder 2E. Neither of those jumps were innovative jumps. They were iterative. They were taking an established D20-paced high fantasy structure and just tweaking it, iterating on it, and making it better and better until you have Pathfinder 2nd edition today, which is one of the most popular high fantasy role-playing games on the market. And that iterative design makes it easy to onboard into these games, because games like Indominant, it uses a D20-based system that's not dissimilar from 4th edition D&D in many ways, and it lets you pick it up and play it right away with almost no onboarding if you've played really any edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Or look at Shadowdark. Shadowdark isn't innovative, it's iterative. And that's not slander against Kelsey. She's made an incredible game. But what Shadowdark did is it took what is in Dungeons & Dragons and other OSR games and iterated on that structure, cutting places and adding things in as needed, while still being very familiar. If you've played any edition of D&D, you can pick up Shadowdark and start playing in 5 minutes. But then you start to notice all of these smart changes that she's made when building this game. And I just want to triple underline this point for all you indie designers out there. It's okay to be iterative. In my game, I have a somewhat innovative injury system that I'm a really big fan of, and other games out there have not used this structure before, and I think that's pretty cool. But the game that surrounds that is just iterative design. I'm just using a rollover system with target numbers and adding static bonuses to a D10 roll. Nothing there is all that razzle-dazzle, because it doesn't need to be. It's okay to make a lot of your game familiar to prop up maybe what's unfamiliar or new. That approach is totally fine. So don't let people on the internet out there tell you you shouldn't make your game because game X, Y, or Z already does that. Don't listen to the haters in that way. Iterate on ideas, make them your own. It's okay if there's already a game out there that fills a somewhat similar niche. That doesn't mean you shouldn't make your own. Take what's in that niche that you like and tweak it, change it, push that forward over time. That's where real progress in the tabletop role-playing community comes from. It comes from us iterating, sharing, and working on these ideas over time as a community. So if you're working on your own game, whether that's a adaptation of D&D or something wholly new, I recommend connecting with other indie designers and sharing thoughts and talking shop. One place you can do so is in the Tales from Elsewhere Discord server, which I'll put a link down below. And if you'd like to get access to more of these design discussions and my additional thoughts on this video and others prior, check out the TFE Patreon page. Patrons get access to an additional unscripted and unedited video every week. So if this is something you'd like to support, go ahead and check that out. All funds from the Patreon page go to the designers, editors, and artists that work on this project. So thank you all so much, and I hope to see you next week on Tales from Elsewhere.